She'll be gone soon. The words dripped louder than the shower. I froze in the hallway, my hands still damp from washing the breakfast dishes. Steam rolled out from the bathroom door, curling like a ghost that had overheard a secret. My name is Helen. I'm 52, married to the same man for almost 3 decades. He's inside that room humming off key, the sound I once found comforting. Now it just filled the space between my heartbeat and the message on his phone. For a moment, I thought I'd misread it, but when the next message flashed, my knees almost gave. "Did you finally do it? Is the old hag dead yet?" The words looked heavier than the screen could hold. My throat burned. The phone still vibrated in my hand like it wanted to shake me awake. Our house smelled of coffee and soap that morning. The clock on the wall read 8:20. Sunlight slid across the kitchen floor, touching the table we'd bought when we first got married. Every detail felt too gentle for what had just cracked open. I remembered the laughter that used to live in these rooms, the mornings we couldn't afford milk but still danced to the radio, promising that love was enough. That warmth, that blind comfort, vanished with 2 sentences on a screen. I didn't cry. Instead, I typed back before thinking. "Honey, check the coffin first." My fingers shook, but the words came out steady. I hit send and set the phone back where I'd found it. The sound of water still poured behind the door, masking everything but my pulse. When he stepped out, the steam followed him like guilt. "You're up early," he said, rubbing a towel over his hair. His tone was casual, practiced. I forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep." He reached for the phone, glanced at it once, then looked at me too long. The silence between us changed shape. Money had always been our language of peace. New appliances when things went wrong, flowers when the fights got too loud. I thought of last week's business trip, the unexplained hotel charge, the way he'd tightened when I'd asked about it. My chest ached as I realized every dollar we spent might have bought me closer to betrayal. I went back to the kitchen, poured 2 cups of coffee like nothing had happened. The smell filled the air, bitter and grounding. He joined me a minute later, pretending nothing was off. "Busy day ahead?" he asked. "Always," I said, staring at the steam rising from my cup. It was the same kind of steam that had hidden his face moments ago. That day, time moved differently. Every sound felt deliberate. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a neighbor's dog, the ticking of the wall clock that seemed too loud. I wondered if he could hear it too, that slow countdown between us. I washed the dishes again just to keep my hands busy. The warm water stung against my skin. In the reflection of the window, I saw a woman who looked calm but wasn't. I thought of the promise I made to myself years ago when he first lied about money, about a coworker, about everything small that built to this. I'd said, if it ever happened again, I wouldn't break quietly. He passed behind me, kissed my cheek. The smell of soap clung to him, mixed with something unfamiliar. Perfume that wasn't mine. "Love you," he said, his voice soft but hollow. I nodded, too tired to pretend. My heart beat slow and deliberate, as if timing the next move. When the door closed behind him, I turned off the tap and leaned against the counter. The house was still, only the faint hum of the refrigerator keeping me company. The phone was gone from the sink. He'd taken it. I didn't need to check to know he'd deleted the messages, but what's deleted isn't erased. It just hides for a while. I picked up the towel he'd left behind, damp and heavy. Steam still lingered in the air, refusing to fade. Betrayal has a smell. It's clean, sharp, and stays long after the water cools. I stood there until the mirror cleared, until I could see myself again. My reflection didn't flinch. It was the first time in years I recognized the woman staring back. Someone alive, someone dangerous when cornered. He stepped out, dripping, eyes on his phone. "You're quiet today." His voice cracked the fragile calm. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, bitter and familiar. Sunlight stretched across the counter, catching the edge of the mug I'd just washed. He sat where he always did, across from me, pretending that everything was fine. My hands wrapped around my cup, though it had gone cold. I looked at him, at the man I once trusted more than anyone. The morning light made him look gentler than he was. For a moment, I tried to pretend this was still our life. I remembered the early years when breakfast meant laughter and rushed mornings, when we'd argue over toast and end with a kiss by the door. Back then, we worried about rent, not loyalty. Every dollar mattered, but so did we. Now we had money, yet everything felt cheap. Our mortgage was nearly paid, but the cost of pretending was higher than any interest rate. He glanced up and smiled. "You've been distant," he said, stirring sugar into his cup. "Work getting to you again?" "I guess so," I murmured. He nodded like he understood, though he didn't. He never asked what kind of work could hollow someone from the inside. My spoon clicked against the cup too loudly. I could feel his eyes on me, measuring, waiting. The air between us had the texture of ash, soft but choking. I looked down and saw it, a faint lipstick smear on his sleeve, too pink to ignore. My stomach tightened. I forced myself to look away. He reached for the newspaper like it was a shield. "You'll feel better once the day starts," he said. "Maybe," I replied. "Maybe not." He didn't hear the edge in my voice, or he pretended not to. He folded the paper neatly, left a 20 on the table, and said, "Buy yourself something nice." As if peace could be purchased like groceries. The sound of his shoes faded through the hallway. Then the door closed. Silence spread like spilled coffee. I sat there a while longer, tracing the rim of my cup. The scent of roasted beans clung to my hands. I stared at the lipstick mark and thought of her. Who was she? Someone who knew his smile, maybe even his plans. I didn't know her name yet, but she already lived between us like a ghost. By 9:30, I started cleaning. It wasn't about dust, it was about control. I scrubbed the table until the wood gleamed, as if polishing could erase deceit. I folded the newspaper and found the 20 still sitting where he left it. I slipped it into the drawer, beside the receipts he never checked. He thought he controlled the money. He didn't realize money leaves trails when hearts do not. That afternoon, I opened his jacket to hang it by the door. Something rustled inside the pocket. A folded piece of paper. One of those small slips from the gas station near his office. But this one wasn't for fuel. It was a purchase at a boutique downtown, time-stamped 7:42 p.m., a weeknight when he'd said he was at a client dinner. The total read $420. Expensive perfume, not mine. I held the receipt under the light. My pulse drummed. "You lied again," I whispered. The numbers told a story more honest than his mouth ever did. When the clock hit 10, I made a list in a notebook. Dates, times, amounts. It wasn't obsession. It was survival. Proof gives structure to madness. I wrote, "If trust breaks, count the cost." It became my quiet rule. He called at lunch, voice too casual. "Did you eat?" "Yes." "Good, don't skip again. You worry me." I wanted to laugh. "I'll be fine." His concern sounded borrowed, like he'd learned it from someone else. After the call, I added another note. He still performs husband when it suits him. The day dragged on. Around 2 o'clock, I looked at our wedding photo on the wall, him in that same blue suit. His sleeve there was clean, no lipstick, no secrets. I wondered if he ever remembered the man he used to be, or if he'd traded him for someone who smiled for 2 women at once. As the sun dipped, I made dinner for one. The kitchen smelled of garlic and quiet resolve. I didn't wait for him. The clock ticked past 7, then 8. I ate alone, slowly, letting each bite settle like a decision forming. I thought about the mortgage, the bank accounts, the jewelry he'd gifted over the years, all the ways he'd tried to measure affection in dollars. Maybe that was the problem. He thought love could be financed. Later, I walked to the bedroom. His jacket still hung by the door, lighter now without its secret. The lipstick stain had dried darker. I touched it once, just to be sure it was real. Then I folded the sleeve neatly, as if preparing evidence. Betrayal doesn't need confrontation right away. It needs patience. Before bed, I opened my notebook again. Under proof, I wrote one line. He left the same smile on 2 women. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator, steady and cold. Tomorrow, I thought, I'd start checking his pockets more carefully. I found the first receipt in his jacket pocket. "You withdrew $500 again." The words came out before I could stop them. He froze for a second, keys still in his hand, pretending he hadn't heard. Then came the same half-smile he used whenever he lied. "Just bills," he said, slipping his jacket onto the chair. I nodded, but the paper in my pocket burned like a secret I wasn't ready to show. That morning, I'd found the withdrawal slips tucked beneath our old invoices. The handwriting was his, sharp, quick, careless. The total stood out, $500 withdrawn twice in the same week. I traced the ink with my thumb, feeling the crisp edge of the paper. He'd always been particular about money, counting every cent, saving receipts like medals of responsibility. But lately, cash had been leaving faster than explanations arrived. By 10:30, I stood in line at the bank, surrounded by the dull hum of printers and quiet conversation. When it was my turn, the clerk, young, polite, maybe 25, looked at my ID and hesitated. "Joint account, right?" she asked. I nodded. Her eyes darted to my wedding ring, then back to the screen. She printed something, slid it toward me, and lowered her voice. "You might want to look at page 2. There it was, transactions linked to a secondary account. My breath caught when I saw the name. Lydia. Neat, unshaken letters beside a transfer marked gift. I folded the printout before my stomach could give way. The paper felt heavy, stiffer than usual, as if it knew it carried betrayal. I walked home instead of taking a cab, even though my knees ached. The cold air helped me think. Each step felt like an equation, numbers replacing trust. Money has its own language, cold, exact, unforgiving. It doesn't lie, but it can hide, and he'd been fluent in both hiding and lying. At home, I placed the printout in my notebook, the one I'd started 2 nights ago. Receipts, I wrote at the top. Beneath it, I added today's date and the words Lydia Transfer. The ink bled slightly on the page, and for the first time, I wondered how long she'd been part of our balance sheet. That evening, he came home later than usual, smelling faintly of cologne. "Busy day," he said, dropping his briefcase by the drawer he thought I never opened. The client dinner ran long. I didn't ask who the client was. "Did you eat?" he asked. I nodded. "Good," he said. No point letting the food go cold. He poured himself a drink, never looking my way. "Overtime again?" I said, keeping my tone light. He laughed softly. "You know how it is." "Yeah," I said. "I do." He didn't notice the printout missing, or maybe he did and decided pretending was easier. Either way, we were both keeping ledgers, his full of excuses, mine of proof. After he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a calculator. The refrigerator hummed behind me, steady as a clock. I added up the missing withdrawals, 2,000 give or take, enough for gifts, dinners, and maybe a few lies wrapped in ribbon. My hands shook, but not from anger, from clarity. Every dollar stolen from our account was a confession he didn't have to say out loud. I thought back to when we'd opened that account together, standing in this same bank, promising it was for our future. We'd laughed about who'd spend more. I'd said, "Probably me." He'd said, "Then I'll just earn more." He was right about that at least. He earned enough to betray comfortably. At midnight, I checked the drawer where he kept old bills. A single slip sat near the back, folded twice. My name wasn't on it. Hers was. Lydia. It was attached to a purchase, hotel stay, downtown. The total hit me harder than any word could. He was paying for someone else's comfort with my savings. I put the slip back, careful to fold it the same way. There's a kind of power in knowing something the other person doesn't realize, you know. Betrayal is like interest. It grows in silence. I turned off the lights and whispered to myself, "Not yet. Proof needs time to mature." The next morning he left early, kissing my cheek as if routine could erase guilt. I watched him pull out of the driveway, his briefcase balanced neatly on the seat beside him. My reflection in the window looked steady, but inside I was calculating the cost of every lie. That's when I understood what he'd really taught me over the years. Not how to love, not how to forgive, but how to keep records. Lydia's name appeared beside our mortgage. "She's just a coworker, Helen." That's what he said, his tone light enough to pass for truth if I'd been the woman I was a year ago. But I wasn't. I'd already seen the bank transfers, the perfume receipts, and the way her name shadowed ours in print. I stood in his office doorway, pretending I believed him, pretending the framed photos on his desk didn't burn holes through my chest. Her face was everywhere in that room, smiling beside him at corporate events, her hand brushing his arm, her eyes turned toward the camera as if she owned the frame. Lydia, young, sharp, ambitious. The kind of woman who laughs too easily at married men's jokes. The kind who sees a ring and calls it a challenge. My gaze drifted over the photo again. She was wearing the same silver pendant he'd once given me for my birthday. So much for coincidence. That night, he invited me to a company dinner. I should have refused, but I went. Curiosity can be cruel when mixed with pride. The restaurant was elegant, polished wood and candlelight. Every table looked like money trying to impress itself. He introduced me to colleagues, all smiling with the kind of practiced warmth people save for their bosses' wives. Then he said it. "This is Helen, my old friend." The words hit harder than any slap. I smiled because that's what polite women do when they're being erased. Lydia stood beside him, laughing, her hand resting on his shoulder, as if she'd earned the right. She said, "I've heard so much about you." I replied, "I wish I could say the same." The table laughed, thinking it was humor. He didn't. We sat through dinner, pretending at normalcy. The wine was expensive. He made sure to mention it. "A celebration," he said. I wondered if he meant for the company's success or his own private conquest. When Lydia leaned in to whisper something, I watched him forget I existed. That was my cue. I excused myself before dessert, before I broke the illusion by speaking the truth out loud. In the restroom mirror, the light was too bright, too honest. I looked at the woman staring back, perfect makeup, trembling lips. I whispered the words he'd used. "Old friend." Again, louder, until they lost meaning, until they sounded like what they were, an obituary for our marriage. My fingers touched the wedding ring, still warm from my skin. I slid it halfway off, then pushed it back on. Not yet, I told myself, not yet. When I returned, the dinner was ending. Lydia stood close to him, her laugh still filling the air. He avoided my eyes when I said, "Ready to go?" She smiled, tilting her head. "Oh, we're all heading out for drinks next door. You should come." I almost did, but then I realized she wanted me there. To see, to watch, to break. "No," I said. "I think I've had enough." And I meant it in more ways than one. On the drive home, he talked about company expansion, budgets, contracts. He filled the silence with business because it was safer than guilt. I counted the streetlights, one by one, until we reached the house. "You're quiet again," he said. "Am I?" I turned to him. "Maybe I'm just learning from you." He didn't reply. In bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, turning lazy circles. The house was too still. At midnight, I got up and went to the desk drawer where I kept the receipts, the notes, the bank slips. I added one more entry. Lydia, office photos, dinner confirmation, motive, control. My handwriting shook, but my purpose didn't. Betrayal teaches precision. He came into the room, loosening his tie. "Don't stay up," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "You think too much." "I learned from the best." His eyes flickered, but he said nothing. When he turned away, I saw the faintest smile on his face, the kind men wear when they believe they still hold the upper hand. Before dawn, I stood by the window, watching the street glow faintly. The city was waking up. Somewhere out there, Lydia was probably doing the same, maybe checking her phone for a message he'd already sent. I pressed my hand against the glass. The chill grounded me. "You've underestimated me," I whispered to the dark. "That's your first mistake." By morning, the decision had hardened. Love doesn't die fast. It calcifies, layer by layer, until it becomes evidence. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building a record. Every smile, every lie, every omission would live on paper. Truth isn't loud. It's patient. The next morning, I stepped outside for air. The gate creaked, the sound sharp and clean. A car idled across the street, engine humming. Lydia's. She was early, or maybe she'd never left. Her window rolled down just enough for her to meet my eyes. She smiled, small, confident, knowing. I didn't flinch. Some wars start without sound. The next morning, Lydia's car was parked outside our gate. "Why is your drawer locked now?" I asked it casually, as if the question were about the weather. He looked up from his phone, smirked, and said, "You're paranoid." Then he laughed. The kind of laugh meant to make you feel small. But paranoia is just intuition ignored too long. That drawer had never been locked in 20 years. Now it had a key, and a man guarding it like a secret. The next morning, he left to buy groceries. His wallet was gone, but the car keys were still on the counter. I waited until the sound of his footsteps disappeared down the driveway. The silence afterward felt too deliberate, like the house was holding its breath with me. I reached for an old nail file from the sewing drawer. My hands didn't shake. I'd spent a lifetime being polite. Precision came naturally. The lock gave after 2 slow turns. The faint click was sharper than I expected, one of those small sounds that divides a life in two. Inside, everything smelled faintly of perfume and something sweet, artificial, wrong. The air felt heavier, like a room that had been living a double life. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Receipts, papers, small envelopes, a spare key. Then I saw the jewelry box. Inside it was a ring receipt. Platinum, size 6. I don't wear size 6. The date was last month. Tucked beside it was a folded motel invoice, paid in cash, total $420. I traced the printed letters with my finger, each number slicing through denial. Betrayal doesn't hide, it organizes itself. I pulled out my phone and took photos of everything. Paper doesn't lie, and I needed proof more than peace. A faint vibration from outside broke the quiet. A neighbor starting his car, the world going on as if nothing had happened. I placed each document back exactly where I found it. The drawer closed with the same soft click. It no longer sounded like wood meeting metal. It sounded like a boundary forming. When he came home, I was setting the dinner table. He whistled as he unpacked the groceries, like a man proud of his performance. "You're quiet today," he said. "I'm just tired," I replied. "Don't overthink things, Helen. You've been stressed lately." I smiled. "Maybe you're right." He turned to reach for a plate, and I noticed the faint tremor in his hand. That told me more than words could. I looked at him straight on. "You locked your drawer." He froze, then laughed again. "You're imagining things." "Maybe," I said, my voice steady. "But imagination doesn't leave perfume behind." The sound of his chair scraping against the floor filled the kitchen. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said. "Nothing usually doesn't have a receipt," I answered. His eyes narrowed. "You went through my things?" "You locked them first." A sharp pause stretched between us. For once, he didn't know how to fill it. He grabbed his keys and stormed out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the window. The sound of his car engine roared, then faded down the street until only the hum of the refrigerator remained. The house exhaled. I sat back down, letting my breath match the stillness. Every part of me wanted to scream, to demand an explanation. But calm was the only weapon that worked. Panic gives away power. Patience builds it. I opened my notebook, the same one that held the bank receipts, and added a new entry. Drawer contents, ring receipt, motel invoice, perfume trace, date, today, status, confirmed. I underlined confirmed twice. The key he used now hung from his chain, glinting when he turned his back to me earlier. It wasn't a symbol of control anymore. It was evidence waiting to be taken. I'd let him keep it for now. Let him believe the drawer was still his secret. He didn't realize the real lock had already shifted. That night, I made dinner for one. The soup boiled softly, rhythmic, steady. At 9, I turned off the lights and walked to the window. His car wasn't back yet. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass like a warning. I touched the frame of the locked drawer once more before heading to bed. Its silence had changed. It no longer belonged to him. His drawer wasn't the only thing locked anymore. "Mrs. Harper, I think you should sit down." The lawyer's tone was kind, but it carried something heavier underneath. I had come to update our will, just as we'd discussed months ago. The office smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust, the kind of scent that clings to paper and years of secrets. I took the seat she pointed to, smoothing the front of my jacket, pretending I wasn't already bracing for impact. The secretary, young, nervous, eyes darting between me and the files, whispered, "Your husband was here last week." "Here?" I repeated. She nodded. "He made changes to the will." "Without me?" Her pause was the answer. She opened a folder and slid a single document across the desk. My name was on it, but the signature beneath wasn't mine. His, though, looked perfect. The ink hadn't even faded yet. I traced the edge of the paper. The texture was rough, uneven, as if it had been signed in a hurry. When I reached the section titled Beneficiaries, my throat went dry. Lydia. Every asset, every account, every possession, hers. For a moment, the room tilted. I steadied myself on the arm of the chair. "Can I get a copy?" I asked, my voice flat. The secretary hesitated. "It's irregular, but yes." She lowered her tone. "I'm sorry, I thought you knew." "I didn't," I said, "but now I do." I left the office with the papers pressed to my chest, my fingers leaving faint creases in the envelope. Outside, the late afternoon sun was too bright. The street looked the same, cars passing, a man locking his bike, but everything had changed. He hadn't just betrayed me in silence. He'd turned it into paperwork. Betrayal, now notarized. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. I picked up milk, bread, and a dozen eggs, things we always bought together. Each item felt absurdly domestic, like props in a play I no longer believed in. The cashier smiled and said, "Paper or plastic?" "Paper," I answered. My voice cracked on the word. I almost laughed at the irony. When I reached home, the clock on the wall read 5:30. That was always when he'd call to say he'd be late. I waited anyway, setting the table out of habit. By 6, the phone finally rang. "Running behind," he said, the usual apology in his tone. "Don't worry," I replied. "Take your time." He hesitated. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said, and hung up. I went upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and slid the will out of the envelope. The paper felt heavier now, like it had absorbed the weight of truth. His name beside hers. My name as a formality, a footnote in the life I helped build. I folded it once, twice, then hid it beneath the mattress, deep enough that even I would have to try to find it again. Proof not yet revealed is power waiting. Dinner went untouched. I watched the clock tick past 7, then 8. Every sound, the faucet dripping, the refrigerator humming, felt sharper. When I finally heard his car pull in at 9, I sat still in the dark, the envelope under me like a heartbeat. The door opened downstairs, followed by the usual shuffle of keys. He came into the kitchen. "You didn't eat?" "Wasn't hungry." "You should have called." I looked at him, my expression calm. "I figured you'd come home eventually." He poured himself a drink. His back turned. "You seem off lately. Maybe I just noticed things I didn't before." He chuckled softly. "You always did overthink." I studied his reflection in the window. There was a time I would have asked him what was wrong. Now, I just observed, memorizing every movement, the hand in the pocket, the loose smile, the practiced normalcy of guilt. Later that night, as we lay in bed, he reached for the mail piled on the nightstand. "Did we get anything important today?" he asked. His tone was casual, but his hand froze on the stack. I turned my head slightly. "Nothing you'd want to read." He glanced at me, trying to read my face. "You're sure?" I smiled faintly. "Positive." He lingered for a moment, then set the mail down. When he turned off the light, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, feeling the outline of the papers hidden below me. He asked that night if I'd checked the mail. "There's something you should know," the postman said. His tone wasn't casual. It carried the kind of hesitation that makes your stomach drop before you even hear the rest. He held out 3 envelopes, all the same beige color, my address printed in block letters. No return address, no stamp from anywhere familiar. I wiped my hands on my apron before taking them. Paper can feel heavier than it looks. The first envelope was thin. Inside, a single line, "You shouldn't have snooped." The second, "Mind your age." And the third, shortest of all, "Accidents happen." No signature on the first 2, but the last had an initial, just L. My pulse quickened, but not from fear. Precision replaced panic. Lydia. She was careless enough to leave fingerprints before. This was no different. I thanked the postman and watched him walk away. He looked back once, almost apologetically. The scent of ink clung to my hands when I unfolded the letters again, as if the words themselves hadn't dried. I stood by the fence, reading them twice. The paper trembled slightly, not from the wind, but from me finally realizing how far they were willing to go to make me back down. Inside the house, I laid the letters on the kitchen table. The late morning light filtered through the curtains, striping the words like prison bars. I could almost hear his voice echoing in the silence. "You overthink everything." He used to say that whenever I asked too many questions. Now every question I'd ever asked had found its answer in threats. By noon, I called my sister Emma. She lived 2 hours away, practical, calm, everything I wasn't at that moment. "You need to call the police," she said. "I will," I replied. "When?" "When I'm ready." She sighed. "You sound just like Mom, always wanting proof before peace." "She taught us to survive first," I said quietly, "and then talk." I hung up, made coffee, and sat staring at the steam rising. Fear has a smell, bitter, metallic, almost like burnt paper. But this wasn't fear. It was calculation. If they wanted me rattled, I'd let them think they succeeded. People make mistakes when they believe they've already won. At 3, I checked the mailbox again. Empty. The street looked normal. Children riding bikes, a neighbor trimming hedges, life pretending not to notice. I studied the small metal door, its chipped paint and squeaky hinge. The camera above it, hidden in the eave, was new. I'd bought it the night before after seeing the will. $89, cheap insurance. It blinked once as it powered on, a faint blue light no one would see unless they knew where to look. I almost smiled. That evening I arranged the letters neatly inside a folder. The envelopes were identical, printed from the same typewriter font, but one corner of the third letter had a faint smear, ink, maybe oil from fingers. I noted it mentally. Every secret leaves residue. My notebook was growing thicker, heavier with names, dates, amounts. I added another line. Threat letters, delivered 10 a.m., postmarked local. Every betrayal, documented. When he came home that night, his voice echoed through the hallway. "Why's the mailbox open?" "It's not," I said from the kitchen. "I saw it when I drove in." I didn't look up from my cup. "Then you must have imagined it." He stepped closer. "You've been acting strange." "Have I? You think I don't notice things?" "Oh, I'm counting on you noticing," I said. He stared at me, trying to measure how much I knew. The silence stretched, and for once, he broke it first. "We should talk," he said. "About what?" He hesitated. "About trust." I smiled. Finally. He left before midnight, taking the car. I watched from the window as the headlights faded into the distance. I didn't chase this time. I didn't even move. Let him run errands for guilt. I had his words, his papers, his ring receipts, and now his threats. At dawn, I stepped outside. The street was cold, quiet, still. The mailbox stood where it always did, a little crooked but loyal. I leaned down to open it. Empty. Not even junk mail. Then I looked up. The small camera above the box blinked once, then twice. Someone had been there. The next morning, the letters were gone, but the camera blinked. "You shouldn't have done that, Helen." His voice came from the doorway, low but tight, like he was rehearsing control. The lamp cast half his face in shadow, and for the first time, I saw hesitation where arrogance used to live. I closed the laptop slowly, pressing the space bar to stop the video. The frozen frame on the screen showed him by the mailbox, a match flickering between his fingers. The letters he burned curled inward, swallowing their own words. I'd been watching the footage since midnight. The house was quiet enough to hear my own breathing, and in the background of the recording, hers joined his, Lydia's voice, unmistakable, sharp as glass. "Make her disappear before the hearing." The sound made my skin tighten. I replayed it once, then again, until every word etched itself into memory. Proof now had a voice, and it was theirs, not mine. He stepped closer. "Were you spying on me?" I met his eyes. "You left no choice." "You've gone too far," he said. I exhaled slowly. "You taught me how." The night before, I'd backed up every file on a small flash drive. I labeled each folder by date, in plain language, nothing that would draw suspicion. The drive sat beside my notebook, both tucked under a stack of unpaid bills. The irony wasn't lost on me. Money and lies always kept company. By morning, the camera above the mailbox had already captured everything I needed. His early routine, his nervous glances, his hand clutching the lighter. Even guilt has a schedule. At 7:15, the recording showed him checking over his shoulder, then dialing a number. I could almost smell the panic coming through the screen, that mix of sweat and smoke. The microphone picked up his breath, a shaky rhythm of control slipping away. When he came home later that day, his tone was calm again. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" "You've been acting strange." I smiled faintly. "You've said that before." He hesitated. "You've been watching me?" "You made me," I replied. Something shifted in the air. He was used to being the one who discovered things, not the one exposed. His anger cracked around the edges. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence between each word carried more power than shouting ever could. He slammed a hand on the table. "Delete it." "No." "Now." I held his stare. "You can't erase what's already seen." For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he stepped back, shaking his head. "You think this makes you safe?" "It makes me visible," I said quietly. After he left, I locked the front door and leaned against it, trying to slow my breathing. I plugged the flash drive into a small USB slot and transferred a copy of the recording to a hidden folder. Technology, for once, was on my side. I'd spent most of my marriage feeling invisible. Now every lie had a timestamp. Around 9 that night, I called Emma. "I have proof," I told her. "Real proof?" she asked. "Audio and video." "Then don't stay there tonight." "I can't leave yet," I said. "It's not finished." She sighed through the phone. "Be careful. People like him don't lose quietly." I sat in the kitchen afterward, the screen light dimmed, watching the last frame again. His lighter, the flame. Lydia's words fading into static. The sound of his breath right before the fire took hold was all there, captured in pixels and memory. I thought about how long silence had protected him, how many times I'd chosen peace over truth. That ended here. At 10, I closed the laptop and placed the flash drive back on the desk. I pressed my palm flat against it. Small, ordinary, easy to overlook, but holding the power to collapse his entire illusion. I turned off the light and went to bed. The next morning, I woke early. The sun came through the blinds in stripes. I walked to the desk, ready to make another copy. The pile of bills was still there, the notebook untouched, but the space where the flash drive had been, empty. The flash drive vanished from my desk that night. "This is the police! Open up!" The shout rattled through the front door before I even had time to move. Red and blue lights slashed across the windows, flickering against the walls like warnings. I opened the door slowly, my hands trembling though I had nothing to hide. The officer at the front, broad shoulders, cold eyes, flashed a badge and stepped inside without waiting. "We received an anonymous tip," he said. "We need to search the premises." "Tip about what?" I asked. He didn't answer. 2 others moved past me, heading for the living room, then the hall. Drawers opened, cupboards banged, the sound of my privacy being torn apart. From the corner of my eye, I saw him, standing on the porch, pretending to look confused. His voice carried just enough to sound helpful. "Is there a mistake? She's never been in trouble." They opened the drawer in the sideboard and pulled out a small plastic bag filled with pills. One of them turned to me. "These yours?" I stared at it, stunned. "No, I've never seen those." The officer's expression didn't change. "We'll log them for evidence." Outside, Lydia's car idled at the curb. She was watching, chin tilted up, sunglasses hiding everything but satisfaction. My stomach turned cold. I realized then what they'd done, not just trying to ruin me privately, but publicly. Humiliation was the goal now. A neighbor peeked from behind her curtains. Another came out with a phone, filming. I stood there, frozen under the wash of blue light, while the officers filled out forms. "We're not arresting you at this time," the lead officer said, "but we'll need to keep these for testing." "Testing for what?" He didn't answer. He just handed me a paper to sign. I refused. He marked "refused signature" at the bottom and left the form on my table. The badge on his chest caught the light, momentarily blinding. When they finally left, I sank to the floor. The silence after sirens is its own kind of violence. My whole house smelled like cold air and sweat. Everything was overturned, drawers half open, clothes spilling out. The police tape on the bag of pills lay like an accusation on the table. A knock came 10 minutes later. Emma. She didn't wait to be invited in. "I saw the lights from the corner," she said, kneeling beside me. "They planted it," I whispered. "I know." She glanced toward the window. "He was outside the whole time, wasn't he?" "Yes, watching." She nodded once. "Then it's time we stop reacting." Emma had always been the stronger one, fierce where I was cautious. She picked up the police form, scanning it with quick eyes. "Anonymous call," she muttered. "Same pattern as before. This isn't protection, it's pressure." I looked up at her. "They won't stop." "Then we bring it to light," she said. "I'm calling Marla. She runs that local column on domestic abuse cases. She'll know what to do." I hesitated. "That's going public." "Good," Emma said. "It's time someone sees what they're doing." While she dialed, I stared out at the street. Lydia's car was gone. The tire marks still cut through the gravel, dark and deliberate. I imagined her smirking as she drove off, confident that I'd crumble. But they had made one mistake. They thought exposure would break me. It only clarified who my allies were. By 9 p.m., Emma had spoken to Marla. "She's interested," she said, covering the phone. "But she needs proof, a statement. Maybe that video you mentioned." "I have it," I said quietly. "Everything's backed up." She smiled for the first time that night. "Then we start tomorrow." We sat at the kitchen table, both of us staring at the half-empty glass of water between us. It was strange how ordinary things, bills, notebooks, even the ticking clock, kept going like nothing had happened. My heart hadn't caught up yet. "I never thought it would come to this," I said. Emma reached for my hand. "He's trying to erase you in public now, so we make sure everyone knows the truth first." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Outside, the last police car turned the corner, leaving the street in quiet darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a faint sound cutting through the night air. I gathered the scattered papers, folded the report carefully, and slid it into my notebook beside the receipts and the will copy. Each page now told part of a larger story, one that wasn't his anymore. As I locked the door behind Emma later, I felt something shift inside me, resolve settling where fear had been. They wanted to frame me, but they'd just opened the stage for their own exposure. At dawn, my phone buzzed. A message from Emma. 2 words. "It's live." Emma's article went live at dawn. Wife accuses husband of murder plot. That was the headline. Bold, merciless, and impossible to look away from. The glare of the phone screen hit me first, followed by the weight of realization. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was news. My name, his, Lydia's, all tangled under that single line. The world finally knew what had been whispered behind closed doors for months. By 8 a.m., reporters were already outside the gate. Their cameras blinked like insects. I stood by the window, curtain drawn just enough to see without being seen. The morning light bounced off their car hoods, sharp and relentless. For a moment, I thought of all the times I had begged him to see me. Now the world was watching, and I almost wished it weren't. The article spread faster than shame. By noon, the story had made it to television. My recorded voice played over grainy footage of our house, the mailbox, the fence, the driveway where he used to kiss my cheek before driving to work. "Make her disappear before the hearing." The line replayed again and again. I didn't need to speak anymore. Proof had its own voice. He released a statement by afternoon. "My wife has been struggling mentally," he said. "This is a tragedy, not a scandal." The same man who once said love meant trust now used pity as a weapon. The networks ate it up. Every word crafted to make him sound noble, every lie polished to a shine. Emma called. "Are you watching this?" "I'm hearing it," I said. "That's enough." "They're spinning it already." "They always do." "You have the recordings. Let them play the whole thing." "They will," I said quietly. "They already are." The next day, the online clips went viral. The phrase, "check the coffin first," was everywhere. Hashtags, podcasts, even late-night jokes. People called it a metaphor for justice. They didn't know it was literal. The sound of Lydia's voice, the fear in his tone, those weren't dramatized. They were history finally refusing to stay buried. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Journalists, lawyers, activists, some offered help, others wanted exclusives. A producer from a crime network left a message saying they wanted to tell my story, as if it hadn't already been told by people who never lived it. I ignored them all. Truth didn't need a studio. That evening, Emma brought over a copy of the newspaper. "Front page," she said, sliding it across the table. I stared at the ink until the letters blurred. The smell of fresh print mixed with coffee. My hands shook slightly as I read my own words quoted beneath the photo. "Silence protects the guilty." I hadn't realized they'd used that line. Maybe I'd said it in anger. Maybe it was truer than I knew. He hadn't come home since the story broke. His lawyer issued statements instead. "My client maintains his innocence." The usual script. But there was no counter for what the recordings held. The audio was everywhere now. Radio shows, online reels, shared by strangers who didn't know my name but believed my pain. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt emptied. Lydia, though, was gone. Her office released a vague statement about extended leave. No one said where she went. Rumors floated. She'd left town, maybe left him too. I didn't care to find out. Her silence was the first decent thing she'd ever given me. The neighborhood changed overnight. People who once waved now looked away. Mrs. Carson crossed the street when she saw me coming. Even the postman hesitated before dropping mail in the box. I didn't blame them. Scandal sticks to anyone who stands too close. I'd learned that long ago. Still, something inside me had settled. For the first time in months, I could breathe without measuring it. The truth wasn't mine to carry anymore. It had its own weight, its own wings. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the reporters pack up as dusk fell. Their lights faded one by one, leaving the house quiet again. Emma called again that night. "How are you holding up?" "Lighter," I said. "You sure?" "I am. I don't have to convince anyone now." "You think it's over?" "Not yet," I said, "but I'm ready for what comes next." The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the table. The number was unknown. The text preview said only one word: delivery. My pulse spiked. I opened the door and found a single envelope lying on the step. No return address, just my name typed cleanly across the front. Inside was a folded document. The paper was thick, official, the kind that doesn't lie. My hands steadied as I read the heading at the top, 3 simple words that meant the story wasn't finished. Then the subpoena arrived. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" The question rang through the room, sharp as a command and final as a sentence. My throat felt dry, but I nodded. The echo of that oath seemed to travel through every year of silence I'd endured. For the first time, I wasn't whispering the truth behind walls. I was declaring it where lies went to die. The courthouse smelled of dust and nerves, rows of faces blurred together behind the railing, neighbors, reporters, strangers who wanted a story. The air was heavy, dry, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. He sat across from me, perfectly still, polished and cold. His suit looked expensive. His arrogance was still intact, even now. Lydia walked in behind him. She didn't look at me. Her hands trembled as she set down her bag, but she kept her eyes on the floor. I wondered what deal she'd made to sit there. The judge's gavel struck once, and the murmur in the room died instantly. My lawyer leaned in. "Stay calm. Let the facts work." The hearing began. The clerk read the charges: fraud, obstruction, attempted coercion. I watched his expression shift slightly at the mention of attempted. He knew that word meant survival. The first exhibit was a folder, thick and worn at the edges. Inside were the bank statements, the transfers, the small financial cuts he'd made to make me dependent. Every missing dollar was a form of control. When they read the amounts aloud, it didn't sound like numbers. It sounded like years. 2,000 withdrawn from joint savings, 6,000 in wire transfers labeled consulting, 10,000 moved offshore. Each figure was a confession he hadn't intended to make. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Then came the recording, the one he'd thought was buried with the flash drive. My lawyer pressed play. His voice filled the room, distorted but undeniable. "Make her disappear before the hearing." Gasps rippled through the benches. I watched him flinch for the first time. Lydia looked up at him then, eyes wide, realization catching up too late. He whispered something to his lawyer. The man shook his head slowly. No more lies to spin, no more stories to hide behind. The silence afterward was louder than any verdict. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Harris, do you wish to respond?" He cleared his throat. "I was under stress. It was, a private argument." "Between you and whom?" the judge asked. He hesitated. "My wife." "Whose life you just threatened on tape?" the judge said flatly. His lawyer stood. "Your Honor." "Sit down," the judge said. The gavel came down once. "Enough." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. The folder sat open on the table, the papers trembling from the vibration. The judge continued, voice steady. "The evidence supports the plaintiff's claim. Accounts frozen immediately. Investigation into financial manipulation to proceed. Court adjourned until review." That single strike of wood against wood carried more relief than a lifetime of apologies. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it steadied me. Justice isn't healing. It's balance restored after chaos. Outside, the clock above the courthouse showed 3:20. The sun hit the steps just right, catching the edges of the marble railing. Reporters swarmed again, shouting questions I didn't answer. Emma walked beside me, shielding me with her arm. "You did it," she said. "I told the truth," I replied. "That's all I ever did." Lydia hurried past, sunglasses hiding whatever was left of her loyalty. I didn't stop her. The truth had its own gravity. She was just one of its casualties. He followed soon after, escorted by officers but not handcuffed. His lawyer spoke quietly into his ear, trying to look confident. He paused halfway down the steps, turned to me and smiled, not the smug smile he wore at home, but something smaller, darker. Our eyes met for a brief, final second. His lips moved without sound, but I read them clearly. He mouthed one word: payback. The silence finally felt clean. It wasn't the kind that pressed against your ears or hid a threat behind it. It was the kind that let me breathe without flinching. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes stacked like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence. Every one of them held a piece of the life I used to defend. I boxed up what was left: his suits, her perfume, our photos. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly on the lapels, mixed with the powdery sweetness of her scent. It made me sick and sad all at once. The eviction notice had come 2 days ago, official and final. He didn't fight it. Maybe he knew he'd already lost more than property. Emma came over that morning, arms full of paint cans. "Fresh start," she said, dropping them by the wall. We spent hours covering the bedroom's old blue with a pale gray. Each brushstroke felt like undoing something he'd done, every insult, every silence. Halfway through, Emma looked at me and laughed. "You missed a spot." I threw a cloth at her, and for the first time in months, I laughed too. When the last wall dried, I ran my hand over the smooth surface. It was cool under my fingers, solid, real. "You're almost free," Emma said quietly. I nodded. Almost. By late afternoon, sunlight stretched long and golden through the window. I wiped the dust off the sill and leaned against the glass, the chill grounding me. The garden outside was overgrown, but I didn't mind. The weeds looked almost beautiful in that light, like proof that life continues even when you stop tending it. A small sound broke the stillness, the click of a box sealing shut. I looked around. Every corner was bare now, except for the stack near the door marked donation. I'd kept one small box aside, labeled keep. Inside were papers, court copies, bank statements, and a single folded photo of me before all of this. I slid it into the drawer beside the new lease agreement with my name alone on it. At 6 p.m., the phone rang. The bank manager's voice was calm. "Ms. Harris, the funds have cleared. The transfer is complete." "How much was recovered?" "Everything that was in your name, plus interest." I thanked him. Freedom, I thought, has interest too. You pay with years, but sometimes it pays you back. After dinner, I walked through each room with the lights off, tracing memories against the dark. The kitchen still held the echo of arguments, but it also held Emma's laughter from earlier that day. The bedroom smelled like paint instead of betrayal. The air was lighter now, as if the house itself had exhaled. I sat by the window again, watching the last edge of daylight slip across the wall. It looked like forgiveness, thin and fleeting, but enough. I didn't cry. Peace isn't loud. It whispers. It asks for stillness, not applause. Emma texted later. "How's it feel?" "Like the quiet finally belongs to me," I replied. I looked around the empty space one last time before bed. The boxes were gone, the floors swept clean. My reflection in the glass looked older, but stronger. The house wasn't haunted anymore. It was mine. Just as I turned off the lamp, I noticed something on the doorstep. A thin envelope, no return address. I bent down, the paper cool between my fingers. My name was written in a careful, familiar hand. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Then came Lydia's letter. "He promised he'd never hurt you." That was the first line of her letter. The handwriting was shaky, slanted, almost trembling across the paper. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd once shared Sunday coffee, and let the words pull me backward. The envelope still smelled faintly of perfume, her old habit of sealing guilt with sweetness. I unfolded the pages slowly. Lydia had written 4 paragraphs in total, each one like a splinter pressed deeper. "I thought I could control him," she wrote. "He said it was an accident waiting to happen. He said you'd brought it on yourself." My hands tightened around the edge. I could almost hear her voice, soft, defensive, trying to make wrong sound like confusion. There was a photo attached, him standing near the garden, shovel in hand, the same week the messages began showing up in my mailbox. His expression, focused, deliberate. Not the look of a man preparing soil, but one preparing an alibi. Proof of intention, tucked inside an apology. I leaned back, staring at the wall clock ticking toward 7 p.m. The house felt different now, emptier but cleaner. Every tick sounded like distance. I read the letter again, slower this time. Lydia spoke of guilt, of sleepless nights, of realizing too late what loyalty had cost her. "He used my fear to keep me quiet," she wrote. "I told myself it was love. It wasn't." A single tear marked the bottom of the page, though I wasn't sure if it was hers or mine. I'd cried enough over both of them. The pain was quieter now, dulled by exhaustion and truth. Emma came by while I was still staring at it. "You okay?" she asked gently. "She sent me proof," I said, "and an apology." "Are you going to keep it?" I shook my head. Some things shouldn't survive their own confession. She watched as I reached for the lighter in the drawer. I carried the letter outside to the small patch of gravel behind the porch where I used to plant tulips. The air was still. I crouched down, struck the flame, and touched it to the corner of the page. It caught fast, orange licking white, curling black. The paper twisted in on itself, the ink melting into nothing. A faint trail of smoke rose upward, slow and steady. It smelled like burnt perfume, like something pretending to be soft while turning to ash. Emma stood behind me in silence. When the last scrap faded, she asked, "Do you feel better?" "I feel finished," I said. We stood there for a while, watching the smoke fade into the evening sky. The sunset had turned the windows gold, reflections glinting like tiny rings of fire. Inside, the house was quiet again, but not hollow, just steady, just mine. I went back to the table and sat where the letter had been. The empty space looked strange, but right. Closure doesn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives in smoke. I poured a cup of coffee and let the warmth sit between my palms. My thoughts drifted to tomorrow, the courthouse, the final hearing. I wasn't scared this time. I was ready to end it the same way it began, with truth, spoken plainly, nothing left to hide. Tomorrow was the hearing for the divorce settlement. "Honey, check the coffin first." The words echoed through my mind as the judge lowered his pen and signed the final page. The sound of that stroke, ink meeting paper, felt heavier than any gavel. Just like that, the marriage that once ruled my life was reduced to a line on a decree. My name stood alone, free of his, untangled, legal now, not just emotional. The clerk stamped it, the echo bouncing off the courtroom walls. I caught the reflection in the polished table, a faint shimmer, like the ghost of who I used to be watching me leave. The judge nodded once, not cold, not kind, just final. "You're officially divorced, Ms. Harris," he said. I nodded back. No tears, no shaking hands, just quiet. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded. Reporters, curious faces. A few whispered my name like it was a brand. Some smiled with sympathy, others with judgment. I didn't owe any of them an explanation. The air was cool, sharp against my skin, the kind of cold that wakes you up after too long in the dark. I walked through it slowly, breathing it in. Emma waited near the car, holding my coat. "It's done," she said. "It's over," I corrected. "Done was years ago." We didn't talk much on the drive. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, like rain had washed through it. At a red light, I glanced in the side mirror and caught my reflection. The woman looking back wasn't broken or angry, just older, steady, unafraid. The lines around my mouth had deepened, but they looked like truth, not regret. When we reached the house, I parked in the driveway and turned off the engine. The evening light stretched long across the yard, brushing the porch steps where he once stood with his lies. I got out, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of paint and dust, but also something new. Freshness, maybe peace. On the kitchen counter sat the final document in an envelope. The decree. I opened it and read each line slowly, tracing my name where it stood alone. No longer beside his, no longer beneath his. The paper was just paper, but it felt like oxygen. Emma leaned against the doorway. "How does it feel?" "Like a funeral," I said. "But no one died." "You sure about that?" she asked softly. I smiled. I buried the right things. I walked to the living room, where the coffin he'd once mentioned in his threats had become a symbol in my head, of fear, of silence, of control. But it had never been real. It wasn't death I'd been afraid of. It was erasure. And now that fear was gone, the coffin wasn't his. It was mine, and I was closing it myself. On the mantel stood a mirror I'd avoided for months. I turned toward it. My reflection flickered in the dim light. The same face, but alive in a different way. "You made it," I whispered. The voice sounded foreign and familiar all at once. The phone buzzed with a message from the courthouse confirming receipt of final fees. One last transaction in a story built on debts and power. "Payment complete," it read. I smiled at that, the irony too sharp to ignore. Freedom had been expensive, but I'd finally paid in full. I opened the window, letting the cold air flood in. The wind carried the faint hum of traffic, the distant sound of a church bell striking 6. The world was moving forward, indifferent, as it should be. The decree lay flat on the table beside the small wooden box I'd kept through everything. I opened it. Inside were only 2 things: the wedding ring I no longer wore, and a folded photo of me standing in the garden before it all began. I placed the decree inside and closed the lid. "I thought I'd feel empty," I said quietly. Emma smiled. "Maybe you do. But empty's where new things start." She was right. The coffin had never been real. It was the death of who I was with him, not the end of me. I walked outside, standing on the porch as dusk settled in. The sky was a deep gray blue, the kind that holds both endings and beginnings. I took one last look at the yard, at the house, at the life that had nearly buried me, and I smiled, not out of triumph, but peace. I buried the past, not the proof. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story with respect and gratitude.